I want to welcome everyone to Blurred Lines, Collaborative Strategies for Online Learning, Engagement, and Outreach. This is an exciting session for us because we feel like it's a really relevant conversation about what's happening in the field right now. So I want to start by introducing my esteemed colleagues who I'm sitting with today. We have Stephanie Powell from the Museum of Modern Art, who is the Associate Educator for Interpretation and Research. Chad Weinard from the North Carolina Museum of Art, who's the New Media Manager. Amy Wike from the Phillips Collection, who is Marketing Manager. And Margaret Collerd, who is from the Phillips Collection, and she is the Manager for In-Gallery Interpretation and Digital Interpretation, something like that. She has a very long title.
Our titles just changed, so we're a little...
We have no idea. And I'm also from the Phillips Collection. My name is Meagan, Estep, and I work on K-12 educator and digital initiatives. So this isn't a duel, but I've separated us out on the slide that we are the educators versus the communicators right now. But I think as we start talking, we'll sort of learn that our roles are really starting to cross, and we're sort of infiltrating each other's fields. So why collaborate? Why are we here? The reason we started this conversation and connected is that we really started to notice a trend in our work, and that you'll see that there is literally a blurring of lines, that beautiful blue scribble drawn in the middle, in between social media, digital media, and education, and that's really where the magic is happening. And what we've noticed is that there's this cross-pollination of ideas happening between the gurus of social, the gurus of digital, and people who are employing educational techniques in the galleries, in the classroom, in museums. And we want to share with you how our collaborations have worked in our museums, in our institutions, and really how we found common goals, and that it's not just about communicating about the institution or communicating about a work of art, but it's really about both, and so sort of finding strategies that work in that way. And we'll be speaking about projects that address this sort of cross-departmental, interdepartmental approach, and then we'd like to open up the conversation. So I wanted to show that these are the guiding questions that we use to structure our presentation and our conversations together, and then we'd like to use these questions to open up the discussion at the end with you. So we're going to move pretty quickly between our different teams and talk about what we've been doing and then open it back up to you. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Margaret, who is going to talk about some of the things we're working on at the Phillips.
Thank you, Megan. So a show of hands here, how many people are familiar with the Phillips Collection? Oh, that's great. Very nice. And everyone up here, too. So a little background, the Phillips Collection is a small, mid-sized private institution in Washington, D.C. We're not a Smithsonian. And we have this really great mission statement, and I have it on the slide here, that says, we're an intimate museum combined with an experiment station. And we really love this mission statement because not only does it come from some of the writings of our founder, Duncan Phillips, but it also gives us this great permission to experiment and test out new things. So in that spirit, we are kind of blurring the lines in our communication and education departments. And I want to kind of give an overview of how this started. And excuse the ridiculous picture of Megan and I staging a Twitter chat. But we thought it was a good demonstration of how we're collaborating in a visual way. And I want to emphasize that our blurring of lines at the Phillips Collection really started as kind of a grassroots, bottom-up project. It really started me and Amy wanting to engage on a project together that then led to another project together. But what we found after we've been working on these things are kind of three outcomes and benefits that I've highlighted on the screen here that actually were things that were really missing in our institution to begin with. One of them is really fostering audience engagement, not just doing programs and developing events, but really learning from our audiences what was working and what wasn't working. The second is our staff capacity, which Chad's going to talk about a little bit more. That being that our education team had all these great strategies for engagement, but didn't really necessarily have the social media tools to implement them in a larger capacity. And our great communications team had a wonderful social media presence, but didn't necessarily have some of the tools to foster engagement. And lastly, this idea of scaling, of taking some of the research and hard work you do for an in-gallery presentation or a smaller program and being able to launch it into a larger realm, whether it's through social media or a digital project. And these are some of the things that I think you'll hear throughout the rest of our talks. So how did all this happen at the Phillips collection? It all started with some Legos. We have this great monthly program called Phillips After 5, which many museums have an evening event targeted at young professionals. It's a great mix of food and booze and a little bit of educational programming. And we really saw this as a great opportunity to really practice the experimenting. And Amy and I wanted to use Legos for one of our events that featured a Danish artist named Per Kirkebe. And Legos are from Denmark, and they actually mean play well. So we wanted to play in the gallery. So we set up a big table with Legos, some reproductions of some of his works of art, and then we encouraged people to build their own sculptures and then Instagram them. And the benefit of this collaboration was really getting people engaged with works of art that were kind of difficult to engage with, and also it launched our Instagram account at the Phillips Collection. And we found some really great results, which led us to some more collaborations, specifically at these Phillips After 5 events. The next one being a still life challenge, also using Instagram, using some of the imagery in Brock still lifes. We built still lifes, people snapped photos, they tagged them with the still life, and we discovered that this was still really working well, this idea that there's an analog playing element that you can then also share digitally, so you're engaging multiple learning styles and really fostering interaction. And then we tried to eliminate this idea of a contest from these other two projects, but keep the digital element. And we, at another Phillips After 5, used our iPads and a Lightbright app to have people build Lightbright works of art. And you'll see here there's an example from our dancers at the bar. We had tons of really fabulous submissions, so I was really surprised how well this translated digitally. And we also used Twitter for a scavenger hunt to engage people in looking at some of these literal Nordic lights we had from different Nordic embassies. So these are some ways that we were able to foster this collaboration, engage with our audiences, and scale. And Meagan is going to speak a little bit about how we then took this to a larger institutional-wide program.
So almost a year ago, in summer of 2013, we came together in the education department, Margaret and myself, and decided to create something that would be a way to reach our more national audience, a way to increase scale. And so we created a weekly Twitter chat called Break for Art. And has anyone ever participated in Break for Art that's here? Mondays at noon?
I see a hand over there.
Hands? Anyone? So we're working on that scale. But it's hosted by an educator, and basically it's an hour-long chat looking at one work of art. And what we're trying to do is use inquiry-based strategies that we use in the galleries every week between Tuesday and Sunday and take that into the online sphere. So we want to actually extend our reach into our online participants who what we've been doing is just sort of engaging with them in a one-off way and saying, if someone says, oh, I visited the museum and saw this beautiful Chase painting, we say, great, glad you came. But how can we actually engage with those people and sort of get them to look deeply? So to begin the process, Margaret and I created a proposal that was sort of who, what, where, how this Twitter chat would actually happen, and we wanted to create some institutional buy-in for the process. And we created a very cohesive set of goals and outcomes and wanted to know really who our participants would be, what they would need, and why they would want to look at these works of art deeply. And then we came together with Amy and crafted a way that so I know this is a very static way of looking at a Twitter chat, but obviously if you search Break for Art on Twitter, you can see different examples of how this works. So we came together with Amy then to start thinking about what our institutional voice would be. Obviously, Margaret and I are very comfortable tweeting as ourselves, but tweeting as the Phillips Collection is very different. So we have a lot of voices. How is social media practice as an institution work, and thinking about how that would be. So Amy sat in on our first couple of sessions, helping us with those ins and outs. And then basically from then on, education took the lead. So we facilitate the chat, we write an outline of questions, and we sort of answer based on what the conversation is. Amy takes everything else. She handles sort of the before and after, promoting the chat, and then afterwards doing a storify. And we're almost a year old. So what we've learned is that we need to continue to build capacity, we need to continue to increase interest in this, and that the only thing that the only cost to us is a little bit of time and a little bit of staff overhead. But it continues to set us up for future collaborations. And now I pass it off to Amy.
Thank you. So what our working together thus far has allowed us to do for our current exhibition, it's called Made in the USA. It's an American art show. And what it's allowed us to do is come together much earlier on in the process and form an exhibition-wide social media strategy that incorporates all of these smaller puzzle pieces that we've been talking about. So what that looks like is the hashtag MyAmericanArt is either the submission method or the participation process for any number of digital, non-digital, or social projects that we have going on in conjunction with the exhibition. And what we're hoping to do with that is twofold. We're hoping to create or find a more robust and all-encompassing idea of the impact of the exhibition versus sort of piece by piece as it comes in and we crunch the numbers. And we're also hoping to give more robust access to all of our resources combined with the exhibition to the user. So it's an experiment, to be sure, and it's in process as we speak. But how that's looked so far is you'll see the first three images on this slide are from our first ever tweet up. It was a preview behind the scenes glimpse into the exhibition for our social influencers. They came on site, they got to know each other face to face, and they had a curator-led tour, a tour of the conservation lab, and then they created some of their own artwork with snacks based on work from the exhibition. And they documented the process, of course, with the hashtag MyAmericanArt all the while. And instead of letting that experience live and die in that 2-week span that we were holding these tweet ups, we used it more of a kickoff into all of the digital and social projects that we had going on with the exhibition that would open to the public along with the show. So that's on the bottom left of your screen is a snapshot of our in-gallery interactive. It's also available online. It's called You Curate, where you can drag and drop images from the exhibition into your own curated space and share that. On the right-hand side is an example of our Color Your Own Masterpiece postcard and marker set that's available in the shop and that all the tweet-up participants also received. And there's instructions on that to share with the hashtag. Our K-12 education program is working with teachers on their in-classroom activities based on 3 works from the Made in the USA exhibition. So you're seeing here the Pinterest board, but those teachers are also very actively sharing out their Instagrams and tweeting the process using the hashtag. And then finally, we had a little bit of fun with this Thomas Eakins painting of a very peeved-looking Miss Amelia Van Buren. And you're able to either write down or share with the hashtag what you think she's thinking. We've gotten a lot of fun submissions with that. And then I just wanted to share a little bit of our feedback. Down in the corner, there's a tweet that says, hashtag MyAmericanArt is blowing up my Twitter feed, and I love it. So that was, we want people to be pinged in many different ways on all of these different fronts. So what have we learned? These collaborations, as they continue, as Margaret mentioned, they really have built our capacity, and they get easier as we build sort of informal templates on how it's done. Collaboration is key, of course. I think that we've learned very well how to capitalize on each other's expertise and let that empower us as an institution. And finally, it has tremendously improved our audience engagement. As Margaret likes to put it, we've tapped into the little sea of creative by creating these spaces where people of all ages can play.
Hello. I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the blurring of lines that's been happening in the past couple of years at the Museum of Modern Art. It's actually been a really fruitful period for collaboration. In 2012, the museum created a cross-departmental working group called RISE, which stands for Reimagining Interpretive Support and Engagement. And a primary focus of RISE was to think about what the future of mobile interpretation would be at the museum, but we also took it as an opportunity space for thinking more holistically and collaboratively about other forms of interpretation and engagement, not only in the digital space, but also in terms of live programming, interpretive content, offerings, physical spaces in the museum, just basic comfort and resources that we could be providing to people. And the RISE group includes not only senior level staff, but also emerging staff from departments across the museum, including education, where I'm from, digital media, curatorial, finance, development, and visitor services. And each core group member is also responsible for leading subgroups that involves an even wider network of people from around the museum. And we brainstorm, we pilot, we evaluate new ideas related to all of the areas shown here. And tying it all together is a visitor evaluation, which has really been instrumental in allowing us to prototype and test and iterate on all of the new ideas to come out of the group. And education really took the lead in the research and evaluation efforts, but we also knew it was really imperative that everyone got involved, even if that meant only observing. And the goal behind that was to not only build empathy for the experience of our visitors, but also to have everyone actually talk to our security officers, our volunteers, our frontline staff, who really are most attuned to what's happening in the public spaces of the museum. So collectively, we have completed a number of studies that have helped us to answer some really key questions about visitor needs and behaviors, which include interviewing visitors about their questions that they have about modern and contemporary art, about specific works in the collection, or just general questions. And then also how many people are using mobile devices in the galleries. And these studies have really helped us to inform the types of experimentation that the RISE group has been able to do. Oops. I'm just operating two things right now. So as a co-leader of the content subgroup, my colleague Sarah Bodenson and I led a series of workshops that helped us to envision the future of mobile interpretation at MoMA. And in one workshop, we convened staff from various departments around the museum to take part in an agile brainstorming exercise, where each participant was randomly assigned a number of visitor personas for which they would write visitor stories, which are basically scenarios that articulate what that individual might want to achieve within the mobile space. So if you're not familiar with the process, the stories take the structure shown up here. As a role, I can perform a certain task so that I can achieve a certain goal. And these visitor stories really helped us to define the initial scaffolding of the content and the functionalities and the features of what would eventually become the mobile app. And then we worked with our wonderful digital media team to visualize these written stories as wireframes. And what you're seeing here is a really early whiteboard sketch for what would become the camera and photo sharing feature in the MoMA Audio Plus app. And then we convened a day-long inception meeting for the project at the offices of Pivotal Labs, which is we have an in-house development team, but they were pair programming with programmers from Pivotal Labs. And so we had this all-day inception meeting at their offices where we gathered educators, project managers, and developers all in the same room for 8 hours. So a couple ground rules were that we had to put away our devices, we had to put away our computers, and just focus on the ideas and just work with pen and paper. So that was a really effective way to get us to just focus in on the experience that we were trying to create, rather than being hung up on the restrictions of the devices that we were going to be working with. And so we convened at this inception for 8 hours to collaboratively determine a few basic things. The goals that we knew we had to achieve by the hard deadline that we had. And we collectively defined what this minimum viable product would be that we could launch with. And also, as part of that, we also defined which features we felt we could release later as updates. We defined potential risks, the factors that could potentially derail us during the development process. This includes things like scope creep or the release of new iOS versions during the development process. And then finally, going back to that kind of visitor's story scenario, we define the roles. These are the people, the primary users that we wanted to keep in mind that we wanted to serve with the app experience. And so we wrote all of the feature stories down on the cards. This is what you're looking at here, this process of ranking them relative to one another based on a system of points, which the points were assigned based on the estimated amount of time and effort involved. And the priority rank of each of these features really determines what gets rolled out first. The stories were then entered into Pivotal Tracker, which gave everyone, not just the developers, the ability to see the progress or the velocity of the app development. And we were constantly reevaluating and readjusting the priority of these stories, which speaks to the agile nature of the project. And then happening in parallel with the code development was the interface design. And once, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to and then, and once again, we're using a collective editing tool called Notism. So overall, the approach to developing the app was what can be described as iterative with episodic releases of an always functional app. And this was important because it allowed us to continually test and debug along the way, which is in contrast to the kind of waterfall approach to some app development. So meanwhile, in the Analog Museum, the education team was also experimenting with new forms of interpretation and engagement. And in doing so, we were definitely inspired by this agile, kind of just do it approach that we were using with the development of the app. So for one, instead of speculating on the potential impact and challenges of new programs, we simply went out in the galleries and did them, with some educators facilitating and some of us observing, documenting, and then conducting follow-up interviews with visitors or surveys. And so the photos that I'm showing here are actually early kind of rough and dirty prototypes of a live interpretation program that has since been named gallery sessions. And these are facilitated kind of pop-up interventions in the galleries that give visitors a more interactive and hands-on and participatory alternative to the kind of information-driven tours that for many years had dominated our program of live interpretation in the galleries. So what we did was, in one period of experimentation, we had a monthly education staff meeting, and everyone in the department basically paired up into teams, came up with ideas, created some props, and then ran out into the galleries and just did them, and then reported back. And then we kept doing this process and honing back until we found what people were responding to and what they weren't. We also play-tested games. This is also another place where this kind of prototyping with early kind of rough drafts of things became really important. What we're doing here is we're about to go play-test the game with visitors, and all we had at this point was just a Word document with some basic rules and no visuals to speak of. But we kept playing this game over and over again. I'm pretty sick of the game, actually. But it helped us to really create an experience that seemed to work for our visitors. We've also applied this kind of agile approach to the development of dedicated spaces for learning and making at the museum. So for several years now, we've actually had interactive spaces in the education building, but we right here you see the MoMA studio, which is located in the education building, and then there's a dedicated family space called MoMA Art Lab. And visitors in these spaces have expressed a desire to see these type of learning spaces closer to, in proximity to the galleries themselves. However, our team had to really overcome this kind of long-standing resistance to embedding learning spaces within the galleries. So once again, the prototype really became our main weapon of persuasion here. We actually, there was a new curator, a new-ish curator named David Platzker in our Department of Prints and Illustrated Books, and he was actually really interested in in bolstering the interpretive offerings around his exhibition called "There Will Never Be Silence," scoring John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds, which actually is still up right now, and he wanted to bolster the interpretive offerings, and he was also interested in activating this space right outside the exhibition, which we were also interested in activating. And if you know anything about John Cage, you know that his process is all about the creative potential of chance and the power of negative space. And so to activate this kind of negative space of the museum seemed like a perfect match with the themes of the show. So once again, we framed this as an experiment. The table that you see here is repurposed from a previous MoMA studio. The chairs are literally pulled from people's cubes. We pulled them out, we put them in the space, and we started with just putting together this kind of reading room with very minimal resources. And David had also, years ago, created a radio show called Sounds of Silence, in which he commissioned artists to respond in some way through sound to John Cage's various sound compositions. And so we put in speakers and pumped that into the space as well. We worked with our digital media team to repurpose a sound map interface that had been created for a previous MoMA studio. And what we did was we asked people to upload and share a few minutes of their silence, record some of the silence, and geotag them, and then we aggregated their submissions onto this interactive sound map, which was available on a kiosk in the space, but then also online. And then in February, we cleared out the furniture. We moved in a baby grand piano, and we got MoMA staff, volunteers involved, and also guest artists to perform John Cage's actual composition, 4 minutes, 33 seconds. And we observed, we documented everything with photography. We had an observational form, so there was always an educator present to kind of observe what was happening. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we also followed up with the performers to have them complete a reflective questionnaire on their experience in actually enacting the score. So basically, by framing this and other new initiatives as a prototype, we kind of gave ourselves permission to test and evaluate new ideas before we knew they were completely refined, and also without investing in abundance of resources. And by documenting everything along the way, what we did was we were able to present to the more resistant people and staff a really successful proof of concept that this type of space was really having an impact on our visitors. And so in May, we're actually going to be facilitating another drop-in art making space located within the galleries of the Sigmar Polka exhibition. And since this experiment, we've also had 2 other curators approach us about wanting to have similar spaces. So just kind of doing it, documenting it, and then having your prototype act as a proof of concept, I think is a really interesting concept. So I'll pass it to Chad. Sorry, do you want me to click it for you?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Teamwork.
Collaboration.
Blurry lines. Can't take it far enough.
We need each other. I am a technologist. I'm involved with social media at the North Carolina Museum of Art. I'm also a web designer and developer. This is me at the Guggenheim this past summer. Fantastic James Turrell exhibition. I'm lying on the floor, staring up at an amazing installation. Next to me is my wife, Ashley. She's an educator. So I come at this topic from a slightly personal standpoint, and I'd love to share two kind of concrete examples based on interesting questions that educators and technologists can ask each other. Next slide, please. I felt like an art historian there. Here's my slide of stereotypes. Technologist and educator on the side there. The technologist can bring to bear three things I see. Scale, speed, and can solve problems of distance. The drawback sometimes, and this is purely stereotype, is building tools with no particular purpose. The educator, on the other hand, can bring to the project techniques and audience expertise and concrete objectives. And the stereotype, again, is perhaps a purpose with the wrong tools. Here's a question. The social media manager. This is kind of the flip side of what the Phillips was doing. So the social media manager, very interested in having a meaningful conversation about art. And that's a great question, a fantastic question to bring to your educator. The caveats on social media, though, and this is what makes it tricky, is that it's got to be quick. It's got to be repeatable, almost formulaic, and it's got to have, it can't require a lot of content knowledge. So for a communication staff, a marketing staff, that sort of thing, it's got to be something that is repeatable. The educator might answer, inquiry-based learning. For us at the North Carolina Museum of Art, I was familiar with the sorts of teaching that goes on in the galleries. So when we do docent training, when our educators bring in a group, they focus on inquiry-based techniques. It's not a lot about pushing content out. It's about engaging in meaningful conversations. They have a specific technique and specific questions that they go through, specific responses when they get certain responses as well. And it struck me immediately that, well, perhaps this is a way that we can translate to a meaningful conversation on social media as well. So to dive deeper into this, I had our social media team take part in their in-gallery teaching, docent training, that sort of thing. Collaborative coaching with the educators told us more about the methodology behind BTS and other inquiry-based techniques that we're already as an institution using in the galleries. And there was the MoMA MOOC as well on inquiry-based learning that I took part in and our social media managers took part in as well to learn about this process and this idea, hoping that we could translate it and perhaps use it in our social media platforms. We did, and we are continuing to evolve an approach to it. Our approach is a little bit different from the Phillips collection in that we concentrate on a more personal interaction. We're seeing a lot of fantastic photos coming through, and I'm sure across institutions, depending on your photo policy, you're seeing Instagram engagement rising by the week. We're seeing people come in, take a picture, leave a comment, and say, this work of art is so meaningful for me. This work of art is my favorite for the day. Really giving us open invitations for a conversation. And so we're learning from our educators and their methodologies how to start that conversation and continue that conversation on social media platforms. For us, it's a lot about responding to someone as they post about us, not so much pushing out the questions from the main accounts, although we do that on Facebook and Twitter and that sort of thing, but as people are coming to us and showing a clear interest in a specific work of art, we're able to swoop in sometimes and say, let's start a conversation about that. Social media managers at this point will panic and say, I don't have nearly enough time to respond to everyone. And believe me, I know that's true. But when we look at the bigger picture and we talk about speed and we talk about scale, in the old days we would have handled this through comment cards or letters in the mail, and we still would have responded to them. It would have taken much longer. And looking at this from the education standpoint as well, educators are certainly more comfortable with devoting time to an in-gallery program that may attract 20 or 30 people. And when you look at the issue from that sort of scale, it's not a huge time commitment to devote a minute or two to start a conversation on somebody's social media post. And it doesn't have to be everybody's post. It can be certain people's posts. It's an interesting question to look at it from an institutional standpoint and to see, okay, social media managers are already dealing with visitor services questions. That's certainly part of the purview. Why not open that up to an educational component as well? I think there's huge potential. Here's the flip side, the second question I want to deal with. An educator might say, how can we help teachers build art integration skills? The hard parts, the caveats, are that it needs to be statewide. We need some scale, and we need to be able to do it across the entire state. They say we need to integrate it into our distance learning program so that we can have a webinar and have people use this tool as well. And we need to be able to capture results and see how people are using this tool. So this is something that an educator, my wife, Ashley, asked me. And it's a great question for a technologist. It's not asking, can you build a web form to encourage this question or that. It's asking, is there anything out there that can encourage this kind of learning? It's an exciting question and a great one. This is Art NC. This is a teacher resource and skill building tool that the North Carolina Museum of Art built. And it's an answer to that question. Like I said, that question is a hard one, and it's not necessarily one that a technologist would know right away. So my first response to that question was, how are you teaching these skills now? And the answer was in person, in teacher programs. They were developing a very analog concept mapping approach where you'll see an example on the left there of a teacher's worksheet where she's matching concepts on the top, circling them, and adding notes, and literally annotating images and linking ideas. You'll see the top right is a photo of one of these teacher programs. The bottom right is what we came up with for Art NC, a finished product of a concept map. This is their way of integrating art into different curricular areas, math, science, and social studies. You're linking ideas and images to cross-discipline themes. So the in-person activity, the teacher program, in essence, became the first paper prototype for a digital tool. We developed the Concept Explorer, which is a graphical interface for this concept mapping exercise. We took a very step-by-step approach. It's a drag-and-drop HTML5 interface. It's very simple, it's graphical, it's meant to be open, almost a sandbox type of space for a teacher to explore and put their ideas in. Again, all of these requirements are coming from a technologist being able to sit in on a teacher program and see how teachers are approaching this task. Let's see. This is step 2 of the Concept Explorer, where they've already chosen their image they want to work with, and now they're going to drag and drop these concept areas onto the concept map. And this is them adding those ideas, those concept terms and related ideas across the map. They're able to basically tag certain areas of the image. So there's spatial tagging as well. But this allows that analog activity, very labor-intensive, very space-intensive, to be scaled across the state. It allows this to be part of our webinars, our online teacher programs, and allows this to also be captured. So now we have all of these teachers' concept maps, and we're able to look at them and analyze them, see what concepts are being used for which works of art, and adapt that for our tours and for teacher programs moving forward. There are so many side benefits of this as well, some of which we hadn't anticipated. And as a technologist, I was fascinated at the process because we were able to use existing platforms, basically the in-person teacher programs, as user testing. The teachers were thrilled to be able to use a digital tool like this, help us out, explore it with us, give us lots of feedback, great feedback, and develop the tool that way. So user testing from the technology standpoint didn't have to be dragging people in and watching them use this tool. It was integrated into an existing teacher program and an existing professional development program. And I'll end with that. Happy teachers equals happy educator equals happy technologist and happy home. Thank you.
Okay, I was going to talk a little bit more about some of the social media experiments that we use at MoMA, and also how the social media team has been learning from education and the art in the inquiry-based approaches, and the other, and vice versa. However, we promised you a discussion, so let's skip ahead to the discussion questions. Okay. And we'll post these slides, so yeah, I mean, I guess maybe just to open it up, are there any people in the audience who have examples of this sort of cross-pollination of ideas between digital media and education and social media? Or any questions about what we presented?
I have a quick question to Stephanie about the collaboration with Pivotal and the agile management process, because I think that it seems like it's something that's very familiar to software developers. And then as you bring it into the museum world, I'm curious how that transition works, if people in the museum teams are willing to sort of embrace the agile software development models and kind of processes, or what your experience is like with that.
I mean, educators experiment all the time doing hands-on things. However, as most of you in the room probably are also dealing with, there's a pervasive culture of perfection. And so that was the biggest barrier, I think, was just, let's not talk about this as some sort of rhetorical thing. Let's just come up with this idea and just try it and ask visitors what, observe how they're reacting to this, and then kind of keep refining. And that was something that we really learned and was really hammered into us through working on the app. So, it's basically, it's almost teasing out the things that educators should be doing, in a way. So. Any other questions?
There's someone in the back.
I have a question for the Phillips ladies. You talked about working with your social media people to create an institutional voice rather than the voice that you tweet from yourselves. Could you talk a little bit more about that process? And also, because you tweet all the time, can you talk a little bit about how you switch between those two people, like a schizophrenic?
That's a great question.
I can talk a little bit about the development of the institutional voice. It's an ongoing process that doesn't stop. I couldn't tell you, when it started. It was already in process when I came onto the team about 3.5 or 4 years ago. But what's helped, I think the main forces that brought it back into the focal point were in the past 3.5 to 4 years. I think there's been probably, like a lot of your institutions, social media has gone from a maybe we'll try this or a let's see where this goes to kind of a given. And we also developed a blog where we were trying to get as many voices from around the institution and even some guest blog posts as a resource for us. And so we had to sort of sit down and take a step back and think about where it was appropriate to be speaking your own voice and where it was appropriate to be kind of the all-encompassing Phillips. And like I said, it's an ongoing process. On our blog, we like to encourage people to have a very individual voice. It's just under the umbrella of the Phillips, but we want people to know that they're hearing from Sandy in IT about his opinion on his favorite painting or something like that. And on our social media, it tends to be a voice that is, it allows for individual voices, but we want that to be the access point for all of those individual voices as well, I guess, if that comes together well enough. And then did you want to take a second?
Yeah, and also to kind of clarify about the nuts and bolts of that is Amy has a great kind of best practices for the institution about how we tweet. Like, we try not to tweet more than once every 5 minutes so we don't drive people crazy. And then, make sure things are spell checked, like basic nuts and bolts like that in my personal tweeting doesn't always come across. But when I think about my voice when I tweet as the Phillips Collection for Break for Art, I like to think of it as my educator voice, if that makes sense, that I'm interacting people with some of my own personal knowledge and experience, but I'm kind of putting on an education hat and using techniques and always having the Phillips best practices and the institution's best, or their best, I don't know how to say it, but...
Well, the line is, yes.
Best interest, that's it, at heart. So, but there is definitely an education voice when we tweet for Break for Art. There's some moments where we say, that's freaking awesome, or that was kind of a sassy comment. So that's the experience you would have in the gallery with us. So we don't want it to totally be super superficial and just great, that was nice. We do dig a little deeper. We do let people's individual voices as the tweeters come across. Did you have anything to add?
I just think that it's a really great question. I think it's very hard. So we also just launched, like Amy mentioned, we just launched social media for our K-12 education side of what we do. And so for me, that's something that I'm going to be managing. And so it's very interesting to go back and forth between tweeting as an educator for all of our audiences for Break for Art, tweeting to K-12 teachers across the country, and then tweeting as me as a professional. So I do feel a little schizophrenic sometimes because I have all these voices that I'm trying to make sure that I'm matching. So I think it's just a very interesting way to approach your professional practice and make sure that that your voice is clear each time, and that that you keep the best interest of your institution and also your personality every time you're expressing your opinion.
That's a great question, though. Anyone else? Oh, yes. We've got right here. Yeah.
Hi. Chad, I love the idea of social media managers going on docent-led tours, and I'm totally going to go do that when I get home. And I wonder if there's a way to kind of flip that on its head and encourage docents to, put out a tweet nug at the beginning of the tour, or encourage their, the visitors, say, hey, to educate them, or if you've had any experience with this, educating docents to say, hey, if you guys are on Twitter, go for it. Or, we allow photography in our collection, so we encourage you to Instagram, because I think that, and docents are a whole other thing, and we certainly don't want them to feel like we're trying to mitigate their authority or their, the attention of their visitors, but to open that conversation up so that they have, so that they know there's an outlet for their voice actually to be evangelized by the visitors. Have you done anything with that?
No, not yet. And that's a great idea, and we've thought about it. And I think it's not just docents, it's the volunteers that we have that are dedicated. It's really a matter of energizing those kind of affiliate communities around the institution, I think there's huge potential in doing that. So what we're talking about is this kind of two-way open educating going on within the institution. So even here at MW, we've talked about computer clubs and kind of sharing technical knowledge across the institution. I think the same is true in this instance. So we should have the technology teams visiting the educators and going on docent training to learn what the institution already knows about talking about art. And if you're an institution where education is part of the mission, or most of the mission, or all of the mission, it's absolutely critical. So I love the idea. Yes.
Oh, there's a lot of hands.
I was just wondering, within your collaboration, do you collaborate with the library, museum, library, and archives? And if you do, how does that tie in? For what purpose?
Well, the museum, library, and archives actually has their own social media stream. I mean, we collaborate with them, but they kind of have their own voice as well, because they have a lot of activity happening. There's a question in the front.
Hi, I was wondering, one of the things that we're wrestling with right now are colleagues in different departments across the museum who really on a very fundamental level don't get the work that we're doing in digital. And so we're working really hard to figure out what type of metrics, what type of examples, what types of success stories can we share so that they can start to have that aha moment. So I didn't know if you all have any examples or advice on how to get the non-believers to understand what we're doing.
I think something that's been successful at the Phillips, and I think Stephanie could speak to at MoMA as well, is this idea of just doing something and letting the results kind of speak for itself, which is often easier said than done. But for example, with the Lego challenge and some of the things that we're doing with Phillips After 5, the success of those events, we were able to kind of drop into some of our reporting to our board or to other departments. And then when American Art came along, we wanted to have this in-gallery station where people could write what Amelia Van Buren was thinking, which is kind of radical to think about because we've never done something like that in our galleries, having like a fixed station. But having some of these examples of how much people liked engaging with works of art in a playful way kind of built its own, and it wasn't like we presented it and then all of a sudden, great, let's move along on the path. It was very like subtle and kind of became slowly built into our institutional practice, if that makes sense. Did you want to speak to it all?
Hi.
Oh, never mind.
I'm over here. Could you speak a little to your experience of sort of ad hoc bottom-up collaboration versus more top-down intentional collaboration?
Is there something specific in it, like strategies? Or?
Yeah, I guess so. In my experience, I've had some experiences where the collaboration was me as like a lower-level employee sort of under the radar, and then other experiences where it came from director level sort of assigned, and I've had mixed experiences with both. So I'm curious about that.
Well, I mean, I would say that the whole RISE initiative was actually a blending of senior level staff and kind of emerging level staff. And so there was a dialogue happening. It wasn't really like, I don't know if those two things, I think there can be a blend there, I mean, no one was telling us, you have to create this thing. But we were given the permission and the support to go out and just try things, So, I don't know, we just felt like we had freedom. And to the earlier question, I was going to say, sometimes the best thing to do if you really want to make a case for a project is to just go out and talk to your visitors and see, let your visitors do the arguing for you. Ask them, observe their behaviors, talk to them about their needs, write it up, document it. Because that's really, visitor experience should be at the core of anything that you produce, whether it's digital or physical, I think. So.
And to speak to ground up collaborations, for Break for Art, Margaret and I were sitting in her office one day and we just started having a conversation about how we could be online more, and what we could be doing that translates what we do every day in the galleries and how we could take that online. So it was literally, it started as a conversation between emerging staff and then we brought it to our director and our entire department as a proposal and sort of fleshed everything out, and then brought it to our other department. And so I think that so we had the experience of just brainstorming and sitting together and thinking, how can we extend what we do without overextending ourselves, because it's something that is a natural fit for us, and it wasn't necessarily, we don't feel stretched every week to create an outline of questions because we're used to researching works of art and talking about them. So
I have one more thing to add to that, the bottom-up approach can inherently build the proof and numbers and statistics that you often need for a more formal presentation or proposal. It's just in trying things out, you inherently get the data that's going to be asked for. So we've found, that we're able to build and build and build because we keep getting more and more data and information to progress.
In that data, you also get to refine your process and refine what your next goals are. So.
I think that also speaks to one of the earlier questions about silos and how perhaps digital doesn't feel like they're being understood. I think it's the nature of silos that each of those silos feels like they're not being understood. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's a matter of a bottom-up approach, some people getting to understand each other and working together on a common goal, just to figure out, exactly what the problems are and to understand each other a little better.
I think we have time for one more question, and then I think we're out of our time.
I was wondering if you could just touch briefly on the extent to which the attitude of your museum director facilitates or inhibits this sort of experimentation and progress you're talking about.
Is that for everyone, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just briefly, because it's my experience that the director's attitude to these things is fairly significant.
What do I say? No one tweet anything I say. No. I think we're really fortunate at the Phillips Collection that it's in our mission statement to experiment, so we can always just point to that. See, we can do that. And being a little smaller, we like to say that we're nimble. It gives us a lot of space to experiment and also fail. And I think our director reinforces that and encourages us from a top-down perspective that way. So it hasn't really inhibited our experimentation, but it's definitely it's been supported. I think so.
I think that goes back to again, having your proposal in order and having sort of a good collaboration where you work together and you have the numbers and you have the stats and you have sort of the facts of who, what, where, and why we're going to do this, because it backs you up and you can sit down and say, this is why this is a good idea, and it's not going to make me not do the rest of the work that I have, because we're creating we're building our internal capacity and also creating a larger reach of our museum.
You guys got anything about directors? Oh, Glenn Lowry. No, actually, I would totally agree with the statement that documenting everything and presenting it and actually having some data and observations, and especially the voice of your visitors to support your assertions is really important. And also, the MoMA was actually founded in 1929 with an educational charter. And it's really very much, the educational mission is very much embedded in the museum's mission statement. And, when we presented some of the RISE initiatives, some of the early pilot projects to Glenn, because we actually did do that, he was really excited. He told us we cracked the nut, which I was like, oh my gosh, Glenn Lowry just said we cracked the nut. But anyway, yeah. So, just having support, actually having solid evidence to back up your ideas.
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you all for all your great comments.